In this video we're going to be flying the recently released FENIX Airbus 320. It's going to be a real-world flight EasyJet from Brussels all the way to Geneva. This is part one of a two-part series, and in this video we're going to go from cold and dark up to cruise. Welcome to the SimHanger, my name's Mark. Thanks for watching and let's get started. Interest in flying airliners and Microsoft Flight Simulator has been invigorated recently by the release of a number of quality aircraft, the FENIX A320 being a case in point. This video is aimed mainly at you GA and VFR pilots that are interested in getting into airliners for a first time. Yes, we'll be getting into a lot of detail, but we won't be dotting every I and crossing every T. That can come later in our airline journey, so you're invited to follow along. The Airbus A320 is one of the most highly automated aircraft in the world today, so it's the perfect one to dip your toe into airline flying. Linked in the notes below will be my config guide for the Bravo throttle quadrant for the FENIX A320, as well as a video providing some tips and guidance on getting best performance. If you're looking for more help and guidance on airliner flying, especially the Airbus 320, then check out FS Academy's Jetliner and my review video, again linked in the notes below. I'd also recommend that you check out another YouTuber and real-world Airbus A320 pilot, 320 Sim Pilot. He has produced a set of excellent tutorials and often does videos flying the Airbus 320. If you're into airliner flying, he's a definite subscribe, again link in the notes below. The Airbus autopilot functions require push and pull actions. These are indicated in the cockpit by an up and down arrow. To make controlling the aircraft easier, hit Escape, go to General Options and then Accessibility. Make sure your cockpit interaction system is set to Legacy and not Lock. Apply and save, and we're ready to go. For flight planning, I'm using SimBrief from Navigraph. This is a freeware application and highly recommended, as life is just too short to manually enter all the data into the flight management computer. I'm also using Navigraph Charts. This is a paid subscription with full functionality built into the Airbus EFB. You can of course use charts from alternative sources. We're cold and dark at a gate at Brussels International, and our first port of call is the FENIX EFB electronic flight bag. And the benefits of using SimBrief will soon become very apparent. Before starting this flight, I entered the data into the SimBrief app. Took me about 2 minutes. It's generated a route, and here we've got an option to tap and import from SimBrief directly. And voila, there it is. Brussels International to Geneva International. And 21 minutes till my planned departure. Good luck with that. Note there's 3 dots on the panel, indicating there's more pages available. If we swipe across, we can go to page 2, and here I can get my METAR or weather information for my departure, arrival airport, as well as any alternate planned. And going across to page 3, there is my route, my flight plan, as well as departure and arrival runways, and you can even pull up a very basic map. Anyway, enough of that, let's get on and move on to the second tab, which is ground services. And here you can see I've got the ground power unit connected, and as you can see out the window, the jetway and door is connected as well. Just open a cargo door so luggage can be loaded. The third tab is mass and balance, and again this information has been imported from SimBrief. We have a planned 114 passengers, and we can now go ahead and load the aircraft. Select load aircraft, number of choices available, I'm going to check fast. Then loading of passengers and cargo will automatically start. Whilst that's happening, we can get on with other things. If not using SimBrief, you can of course enter this information manually. SimBrief is not a prerequisite. In the EFB you can access the main menu from the top drop-down arrow, and let's head off to Navigraph. The Navigraph subscription is built into this EFB but can be accessed from the top toolbar for other aircraft and will display as a separate window. The one advantage of Navigraph, it keeps your nav data fully up to date. I've tapped to import the flight plan and it's automatically selected my departure, arrival and alternate airports. If I click on route, I can get a basic overview of the route that I'm on today from Brussels heading south to Geneva. From the menu, let's select Brussels, and a drop-down menu appears with information available via category, arrival, departure, and so on. First of all, let's go to ground charts and pull up the airport information. We may need this for taxiing. There it is. Click on that, and it displays the information for Brussels International. Notice the little blue arrow. That's where I am at the moment. Notice I clicked the star so I can access it quickly in the future. Now to the departures. Our route had a standard instrument departure, which was the Rouse 2 Yankee. Let's have a look and see if we can find that. There it is. Once again, we can click on it and bring up the information, and it will show us our standard instrument departure from runway 07 right. The chart contains all the information we're going to need. You have the ability to zoom in and out if you want. And as I may need to refer to this chart again, I'm going to click the little star next to the chart name, and this will give me much quicker access in the future to just the charts I need. And now if I just select Start, I will only have the airport and the standard instrument departure charts available for quick and easy access and future reference as I plan my departure. And of course you can do exactly the same for the arrival airport and so on. I'll go ahead and select all the charts I may need in advance of departure to make it easier during the flight. That's now done, so from the top menu I'm going to select the pilot cap, which is the pilot briefing data, and once again I'm going to get the opportunity to import the flight plan information which I'm going to need for the FMGC directly into the EFB. There it is, done. The benefit of this is that this SimBrief data, a large portion of it, can be linked directly to the flight management computer. Information available here includes the route, flight level, runways, cost index, as well as fuel and wind information. We're about done now with the EFB. Boarding has been completed. Thank you very much. In my sim settings I've got jetways etc. automated, and as we can see out the window, the jetway now is moving away and the doors will close. We're a bit later than we should be, but never mind. Let's now start preparing for departure. In the real world, of course, much of this would be done prior to boarding. Before we fire up, a couple of prelim checks. Starter switch in the center, both engines off, parking brake on, flaps and spoiler fully retracted, and our gear is down. That's all done. Now to the overhead panel. As we saw, our GPU is connected and external power is showing as available. Let's get both batteries on. They're on, voltage showing on both sides. And now to connect the external power, our GPU. We have life. The lights light up. Before continuing, we need to wait about 40-45 seconds for everything to start up and initialize. Our glass display is going through self-test mode. Those three chimes tell us the basic initialization has been completed. So let's head back to the overhead panel. We can do a quick check, fire check on the APU. That's all good. Now to run through the overhead panel, we start bottom to top, left to right. Wipers are off, cruise supply we can switch to on, and we also need to enable our ground control. That's done. Next we need to enable the IRS, and all three need to be turned to the nav position, and our SIS or system button turned to the position number 1. Down to the bottom again and put our strobe lights onto auto and move our nav and logo lights to the 1 position. Move our emergency light switch to the arm position, and as we've already been advised that all our passengers have been loaded on board, we can put our seatbelt light switch on and no smoking in the auto position. Check our cabin pressure is in the auto, very important. It's not cold, so we don't need the probe window heat on. Don't need to worry about the packs at this stage, but we can now turn on all of our fuel pumps. And on the Airbus, no light means it's on, white light means off or not engaged. We can now do a quick fire test on both engines. Back to the bottom on the right hand side, not much for us to do here. Not carrying any live cargo other than passengers, of course, so don't have to worry about cargo heat. That's it, we're all done for the overhead panel for now. Quick check on the comms. VHF1 is lit, that's fine. Cross to the right hand side and make sure that the transponder is on standby, which it should be by default at this point, which is switch all the way to the left. And the switch here is our TCAS, traffic advisory, again all the way to the left. I'm going to enter a squawk code. We're not using live ATC. Let's say it was 2356. That's now entered. Check that the throttles are at idle, which they are. We can also pop down to the ECAM panel. And here we can check the status of various systems. And this is something the co-pilot would normally be running through. Here's our hydraulics. We should also check on the doors, as loading has been completed and we can see they're all closed. Main access doors still to be armed. Our electrics, and of course engines, oil and so on. But now it's time to get into the flight management guidance system. And firstly we're going to select ATSU and then AOC menu. Option to request the weather, we'll select that. Let's enter our current location, which is Echo Bravo Bravo Romeo, Brussels International. Comes up the scratch pad at the bottom, then click on the LS key and that data is entered. We've selected METAR and then send. Now oddly here you've got to press return and return again and then select receive messages. And we see we've got two. Firstly there's the weather information. So if you're not using SimBrief, here's a quick and easy way to access the weather. We of course could have just used the EFB. Only a light 3-knot breeze, few clouds at 3200, QNH 1022. As loading is complete we can check our load sheet. This would normally be done whilst taxiing, not normal to get a load sheet so early, and it's just confirmation to the pilot of any changes that could have a material effect on his computations for departure, etc. That's pretty much as planned, so we're okay with that. We can exit any menu via the shortcut by hitting the MacDo or MCDU button. And now to the Flight Management Guidance Computer, FMGC. And here I'm unashamedly copying 320 SimPilot, and I'm assuming real-world pilots use the DIFSRIP acronym to remember the sequence in which to program the FMGC. There's a lot of pages and it's quite easy to get confused. You can't remember it all. I find DIFSRIP works for me. D is for data, and here we can check that our nav data is up to date. We can see from the dates here my nav data is current. Yours may not be, not a problem. Mine has been updated via the Navigraph subscription. I'm happy with that. It's time to move on to I, which is Init A being page 1. There's an option to initialize your IRS or positional information, but that's not really required. It's done automatically here. What I can do is select Init Request, and this will pull the information from SimBrief. Alternatively, you would enter this data manually. Bang, it's there. Well, most of it is. There's still some data you need to enter manually. Asking for the flight number, which is Echo Zulu Sierra 1534. Enter it into the scratch pad, then click the LS key next to the data point. Next it's asking for the cost index, which I know is 31 from the SimBrief pilot's data that we looked at earlier, and I'm also aware that our flight level or cruise level is 31,000 feet today, so I'll enter 310 and enter that in the appropriate box, and it automatically picks up the temperature information. Ground temperature is 15, that's correct, and here's a big time saver. Click on wind and wind request, and it pulls in all the wind information for the various altitudes for both departure, cruise and arrival. Just in terms of data entry, this has saved me heaps of time. Remember, this is a highly automated aircraft. The more data and accurate data you put into the system, the more reliable and accurate the aircraft will fly, and the less hassle you'll have. Quick look at the flight data on the EFB. There's my cost index, and here you can see my flight level, 31,000. Now on to F, which is flight plan, and we can see the basic flight plan has been imported. Up down arrow to scroll through. Let's select our departure airport, Echo Bravo Bravo Romeo, and we can now choose our departure. We know that it's runway 07 right, so we can select that. and once selected it will ask us if there is any standard instrument departure or SID. Well, we know that there is. We had a quick look at it earlier. It was the Rouse 2 Yankee departure, so let's find that. Again, using the arrows to move up and down. Large airports can have a multitude of different SIDs. There's Rouse, so we must be getting close. There it is, Rouse 2 Yankee. I've selected that, and now select Insert. It takes me right back to the flight plan, and now I see I have the departure waypoints computated in as well. When you've got a large flight plan, hit the F-plan button, it'll always take you to the top, or hit the airport button, it'll take you to the end of the flight plan. For simplicity, I'm going to enter the arrival information now. In the real world, well, the pilot may not know that, and this can be entered during the flight. Our arrival is LSGG, Geneva. Select that, and then choose arrival. And again from our flight plan, we know that it's ILS 04. Now to select our star or standard terminal arrival route. Well, I can't quite remember what it was, so back to the AFB and my pilot briefing just to check. I'm just going to scroll down a little way. That's all my fuel information. I'll need that shortly. Looking for the route. There it is, and it's the Akito to November. Just check we got the right departure. Rouse to Yankee. Yep, that all looks good. Looking for the Akito to November departure. There it is. Select that by clicking on the relevant LS key, and now I can insert. Now that our flight plan's in, we need to check it. Also note the purple numbers. They're altitude restrictions, limitations on our departure. You'll often find similar on arrivals. We can show these constraints by hitting the Constraints button to get a visual representation. We also need to check our flight plan for discontinuities. So I've changed the selector to plan, and by rotating the switch I can change the number of nautical miles visible at any one time. Now using the up arrow on the FMGC, I can now page through the flight plan. If I see there's any breaks, then I know there's a discontinuity. A discontinuity effectively is where the flight plan stops at a point and the autopilot will await manual intervention, or alternatively you have the option to delete the discontinuity. So far so good. We're now on the approach near Geneva and we can see that we have a discontinuity. For the start we have the downward leg, but nothing to link us back to the ILS. At times this may be desirable, as we may not be sure what ATC will instruct us, but in this example we don't want that. So let's get rid of the discontinuity. If we have a look at our flight plan on our secondary display, let's just zoom in a little bit here. What I want to do is join up these 2 points. This will give me a nice transition from my approach through to the ILS for runway 04. I can do this by entering clear into the scratch pad and then clicking next to the entry that I want to delete. That's a manual instruction gone. And now to get rid of the gap, clear again and next to discontinuity, delete that, click insert so it accepts the changes, and now we can see that the flight plan is fully joined up. I'm happy with that. Now I'm going to change my display back from plan to arc, which is the display I would normally use when flying. Time now to move on to S, which is secondary flight plan. Select that button. I get an option to copy the active, and this automatically copies the flight plan across to the co-pilot's FMGC. Next is RadNav. This is where we can enter our navigational beacon information, but as we've entered our flight plan, the Airbus will auto-tune all the nav stations as we go. So now moving on to I, or inner to B. Notice the arrows in the top right hand corner indicating there are additional pages available. Select the appropriate arrow on the keypad and we're taken to the second page of the initialization. And here we need to enter some further information, asking for our zero fuel weight center of gravity, and our block fuel. All this information we can get from our EFB and the operational flight plan, but for block fuel we can also see it here. 6.65 tons. I'll round that off to 6.7 tons and enter that information. 6.7 in the scratch pad and enter. For this information we're going to have to go back to the EFB. We head back to our mass and balance tab. And here we can see our zero fuel weight is 55.6 tons and our zero weight CG figure is 30.4. Make a note of those and let's head back and enter that information into the FMGC. Zero fuel weight was 55.6. Enter that into the scratch pad. Then the forward slash. Now the CG figure, which was 30.6. No, 30.4. Let's enter that. Now you just need to give it a moment. It's doing its relevant computations and then it should fill in the blanks for us. There we go. This is indicating we've got 2.9 tons extra fuel, which we know is not correct. So I need to enter the alternate fuel as well. Our alternate today is Zurich. And again, from our operational plan, I know that that's 1.4 tons. Enter that information and it shows extra of 1.8 tons or 53 minutes, which is about right. I've allowed 30 minutes contingency and 30 minutes extra fuel. And finally on to Pref or Performance tab. And once again here we can use the EFB to find the data that we're looking for. Back to the EFB and choose the aircraft icon to select the relevant information that's required. And here we've got a simple table that'll help us calculate our V speeds. Enter our runway, which is 07 right. My flaps are going to be flaps 1. I'm not going to have anti-ice on. My packs will be on. And now sync the load sheet, and I can also sync the live weather. That's all the information that it needs. The FB can now do its job, and we'll click on the Calculate tab. And we can see on the right hand side it's completed and filled in all the relevant information. V speeds, our trim setting, which is flaps 1 down 0, and our flex of 68%. Flex being directly related to the throttle required for takeoff. Now got all that information, so let's enter that in. V1 was 132. VR and V2 rotate was 135. Flaps and trim we know, that was 1 and then forward slash down, which is Delta November, and then 0.0. We can enter that. And lastly our flex, which was 68. The option to go to next phase will be different phases of flight, but arrival information will enter en route. Yeah, I know there was a lot of work there, but that's the FMGC setup for departure. And now just entering our initial departure altitude, we'll assume from ATC as 10,000 feet or flight level 100, as transition here is 4,500 feet. Note against my speed, my heading and my altitude there's the round dot. If I pull out, dot disappears, which indicates I'm in manual mode. Pushing in or the up arrow changes these settings to manage mode. And what this means is the computer is going to manage the heading via nav and the airspeed based on information that's in the flight plan. Let's just take a quick closer look. You can see here through the various waypoints there are the purple asterisks for both speed and altitude. With the Airbus in manage mode, this is what the aircraft is going to try and achieve. If the asterisk was orange, it would indicate a constraint, but the computer couldn't make that constraint. If it's purple, the computer's happy it can achieve that. Now final preparations before pushback. We need to set the pressure, the QNH, which is 1022 at Brussels today. We need to manually set this on both sides and also manually for our backup. We're going to be disconnecting ground power very shortly, so up to the APU, let's get that started. Select the starter fan, wait a few seconds, let it spool up as it were, and then hit the start button, which is directly below it. We need to make sure it fully spools up before disconnecting. We can go back to our ECAM panel and select APU. The lower display panel will now show the APU and we can monitor its progress. APU flap open and we should start to see it spool up any minute now. There it goes. APU is stabilized. Now go up and we put the APU bleed on Got to make sure we keep our passengers comfortable. And now we can turn the ground power off. That's now off, so time to get the ground crew to disconnect the ground power unit, and we'll ask them to remove the chocks at the same time as we're ready for pushback. The FENIX has its own pushback, so we'll stay on this page for now, and we'll ask them to connect the tug. And we'll assume we've got clearance from ATC to push back at this point. If, like me, you'll be impatient to get going by now. What's clear is Airbus pilots work hardest before the aircraft even starts the engines. Put our beacon lights on to indicate we'll be moving soon to the ground crew. Quick check of our Navigraph airport chart. Make sure we're clear on where we're going to taxi to runway 07 right. So we're going to push back straight, then tail to the right, and hopefully that will loop us directly onto the taxiway, facing directly towards runway 07 right. Let's head back to our ground control. Ready for pushback, so parking brake off. And we'll select start, and we're moving. We'll start one engine during the pushback. Just give us a moment to clear some of the vehicles that are parked there. And we're doing a 2-engine taxi today, so we'll start engine 2 first. Switch to engine 2 and then push engine 2 lever forward. And we can see it starting to spool up on the engine displays. We'll leave that engine to spool up for now. Need to swing the tail to the right. So we push back onto the taxiway. Quite a long pushback, so we might as well start engine 1. Selector is still in the start and push lever 1 forward. N2 and EGT already starting to rise. We've now stopped our pushback, parking brake engaged and tug disconnected. Time for preparations for taxi. Our taxi lights can be moved to taxi. Our runway turn lights can come on. Landing lights, of course, will stay off at this stage. Both engines are stable, so we can now turn off the APU. We don't need that anymore. Bleed off and APU off. Quick test of our flight controls in pitch and roll. And from the ECAM panel, I've selected flight controls, so I'm sure I'm getting movement as expected. We're ready to go. Parking brake off. And just nudge the throttles forward just a little bit. We're not too heavy today, and let's start heading towards the runway. Gentle dab now and then on the toe brakes, that all seems fine. We can now arm the spoolers and set our flaps to flaps 1. Now she's started to move, while throttle's almost right back at idle. And for takeoff we want to set our auto brakes to max. That's all looking good so far. This is a beautifully rendered airport. It's Brussels International and it's from Aerosoft. And it's currently my favourite airport. The amount of detail involved both within the terminal and outside is just stunning. Very realistic and very immersive. If you'd like to know more about this airport, check out my review, linked in the notes below. You may have also noticed at the airport a lot of different liveries on the AI traffic. This again is an add-on package, and again it's from Aerosoft. It's simple traffic. It doesn't change the AI traffic in any way, but it does give you more realistic and relevant liveries depending on which airport you're at. Forgot to change the engine selector switch back to the center position. That's now done. That should of course be done after engine start. But hey, what do you expect from a bush pilot? Last item as part of our pre-flight is to test the takeoff configuration by pressing this button here. Message comes up as normal, and we can check that on the ECAM-SIS panel as well. All good, we're cleared to below the line. Make sure you've got a green light on both flight director buttons. ATC has now cleared us for takeoff, so we can turn on our landing lights. And we can move our taxi lights up to takeoff. No blue on the ECAM panel, and a quick check on the overhead panel, make sure there's no white lights. Transponder is now on, and TCAS to TARA. We're good to go. Let's line up. We've been told to line up and wait. We'll come to a stop, hold her on the tow brakes. For takeoff, we'll be advancing the throttles to the MCT, maximum continuous thrust mark, and shortly after takeoff, pulling it back to climb. We won't be pushing the throttles all the way forward. Advance the throttles to 50% and let them stabilize there, holding on the tow brakes. Tow brakes released, and we're rolling. Remember our V speeds? 132 is V1 and 135 is rotate. Those speeds are indicated on the PFD right in front of us. When we take off, we want to pull up steadily to 15 degrees over about 5 or 6 seconds. Once we have positive lift, gear up. Speed now approaching 110 knots. Throttles at flex 68%. V1, V2, and let's pull up. And we're aiming, as I said, for about 15 degrees. There's 10. There's 15. Now we want to hold this attitude and follow the crosshairs on the flight director on the PFD directly in front of us. Positive climb, gear coming up. Gear lights are out, so safely retracted. Just passing 1,300 feet. Speed approaching 180 knots, so flaps fully up. And once up, the S on the speed tape will disappear. There it goes. Continuing to hand fly this, passing 2,000 feet and throttles back to climb. With the Airbus 320 you can engage autopilot very soon after takeoff, but it's often good fun to do a little bit of hand flying. I got my nose a little bit high, need to bring that down. Starting to lose speed, I don't want that. I no longer need the spoilers or air brakes on. Coming up on 5,000 feet. Now approaching 5,500, and it's time to put the autopilot on and let the aircraft do all the heavy lifting. I'm going to put on autopilot 1. Note on the main display the QNH is flashing. That's because I'm above the transition altitude. It's a reminder for the pilot, and this is what the Airbus does very well. Constantly communicates with the pilot. Pull out to set them to standard and press in for the standby altitude indicator. Once the autopilot button is pressed, the aircraft goes into managed mode. Altitude, climb and speed will be as per the flight plan. We're just completing our turnout as part of the standard instrument departure from Brussels. Now passing 8,000 feet, and ATC has given us clearance to climb higher to 23,000 feet. So we can dial this in to the altitude setting, making sure we remain in managed mode. The secondary flight display, it shows our flight plan, can also show VOR information, and we can do that by clicking the switch over to the right, and we see the VOR information displayed. This can be very useful, especially when transitioning from autopilot to a manual mode. Speed is fixed at 250 knots as we're below 10,000 feet, and as we pass 10,000 feet, well, landing lights can come off, as well as our runway turn lights. In fact, we could have turned those off earlier if we'd wanted to, no matter. And obviously we don't require our taxi lights anymore either. The rest of the lights are fine, they can stay exactly as they are. In addition to being able to change the range in nautical miles for the information displayed, we can also select waypoint, VOR, NDB or airport information. It's up to the pilot. The normal setting, of course, is constraint. Just coming up on 13,000 feet. We continue to climb, now passing 16,000 feet, and ATC have given us clearance to our cruise altitude of 31,000. So let's dial that in. Your new altitude should be reflecting on your PFD. If you ever find that she's not climbing as intended, Move over the altitude button and hit the up arrow again to make sure you're in altitude managed mode. Whilst we continue our climb, we can head back to the FB and to the Navigraph charts. And I've selected our SID, or Standard Instrument Departure. One very neat feature of Navigraph is it shows your position via the blue arrow on any of its charts. We're still on the Standard Instrument Departure and still got a little way to go before we get onto the main route itself. Just crossing 25,000, 6,000 feet to cruise. The aircraft has continued to manage the speed and increase speed itself once it was above 10,000. That little arrow on the route plan is the top of climb. That's when the aircraft is estimating we will reach 31,000 feet. We've now just reached 31,000 and starting to settle down. The FENIX Airbus 320 managed the climb admirably. Our job as pilots is mainly to monitor the systems and check for any errors, and be prepared to intervene if we need to. That brings us to the end of part 1. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more like this, and a thumbs up if you enjoyed it or found it helpful. In part 2 we'll be managing descent right through to the ILS and landing, and that video should be out soon. Thank you very much for joining me. Take care, look after yourselves. I'll see you all again very soon, and bye for now.